Show me your hands! Show me your hands! Turn around!
It was a quiet Friday night in Ocala, Florida. June 2nd, 2023. The kind of evening where the sound of children playing in a shared grassy lot should have been the only noise filling the air. But for Susan Lawrence, that sound wasn't a sign of life. It was a declaration of war. For over 2 years, a toxic, escalating feud had been brewing between Lawrence and her neighbor, Ajika AJ Owens. It was a dispute over the simplest of things, where children play, where they stand, and the noise they make. But on this night, the tension reached a point of no return. The story of Susan Lawrence and AJ Owens is more than just a tragic confrontation between neighbors. It is a case that forced the state of Florida and the nation at large to look at the intersection of stand your ground laws, racial bias, and the terrifying reality of what happens when a neighborhood dispute is met with a firearm. Today on Crime Explorer, we are going deep. We are looking at the body cam footage, the interrogation room tapes, and the court testimony to understand how a dispute over a pair of roller skates ended in a 25-year prison sentence. To understand June 2nd, we have to understand the two women involved. AJ Owens was a 35-year-old mother of 4, known as a supermom in her community. She was a hospitality manager, a devoted parent, and a woman who was fiercely protective of her children. Susan Lawrence was 60 years old, living alone, and by all accounts increasingly agitated by the presence of the neighborhood children. The conflict wasn't new. Between January 2021 and the night of the shooting, the Marion County Sheriff's Office had been called to this specific address at least half a dozen times. Lawrence frequently complained that the children were trespassing on her property.
What's going on? Kids keep running back and forth over here.
Though the grassy area in question was a common space shared by the apartment complex, she claimed they were terrorizing her. Neighbors, however, described a different reality.
She has called the cops just for them playing. She calls them names.
They told investigators that Lawrence would often come outside to yell at the children, using racial slurs and filming them with her phone. On the night of the shooting, the spark was a pair of roller skates. According to witnesses and police reports, Lawrence became enraged when one of AJ's children accidentally left their skates on the grass near Lawrence's unit. Lawrence reportedly picked up the skates and threw them at the child. When the children went home and told their mother what had happened, AJ Owens did what any parent would do. She walked across the grass to have a conversation. She wanted to know why a grown woman was throwing objects at her children. When AJ reached the door, she knocked. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't attempt to kick the door down. She stood on the porch, demanding that Lawrence come out and talk. Inside, Susan Lawrence was waiting.
And you're inside your house, and she's on the other side of that wall and that door.
She didn't call 911 first. She didn't retreat to a back room. Instead, she took her .380 caliber handgun.
And then at that moment is then when Ms. Owens was shot,
which she had purchased a year prior for self-defense, and she fired a single shot through the closed, locked door.
Where's your gun at? You got hands on?
The bullet struck AJ Owens in the upper chest. She collapsed in the grass, in front of her 9-year-old son. By the time deputies arrived, AJ was unresponsive.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up, baby! Wake up!
She was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. When the police arrived at the scene, the body camera footage captured a chillingly calm Susan Lawrence. As she was being detained, she immediately began laying the groundwork for a self-defense claim. she told officers. "I was scared for my life, and they were trying to break down my door." She spoke about the children as if they were a coordinated gang, and about AJ Owens as if she were a violent intruder, rather than a neighbor seeking an explanation. This brings us to the first major hurdle of the case, Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Under this law, a person has no duty to retreat and has the right to use deadly force if they reasonably believe such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. For several days after the shooting, Lawrence was not arrested.
And what we have to rule out is whether the deadly force was justified or not before we can even make the arrest.
The sheriff's office explained that they had to determine if the law applied. This delay caused an outcry across the country. How could a woman shoot an unarmed mother through a locked door and not be immediately charged? But as the investigation continued, the evidence began to tell a different story. Forensic analysts examined the door. There were no marks of forced entry, no dents, no shattered wood, nothing to suggest that AJ Owens was trying to break in. The imminent threat that Lawrence claimed to feel was not supported by the physical reality of the scene. Furthermore, the history of Lawrence's behavior, the racial slurs, the previous threats, and the fact that she had been practicing at a shooting range suggested premeditation and animosity rather than sudden paralyzing fear. 4 days after the shooting, Susan Lawrence was arrested and charged with manslaughter with a firearm. Prosecutors initially faced pressure to charge her with second-degree murder, but they argued that manslaughter was a more provable charge given the complexities of the self-defense laws. They needed a conviction that would stick. The trial, which took place in August 2024, was a masterclass in forensic evidence versus subjective testimony. The defense tried to paint Lawrence as a frail, elderly woman who had been bullied and harassed by the neighborhood children for years. They argued she was suffering from sensory overload and that the loud knocking on her door triggered a fight or flight response. They brought in experts to talk about her mental health and her history of childhood trauma, suggesting that her perception of danger was skewed by past experiences. The prosecution countered with a simple, devastating fact. AJ Owens was unarmed and behind a locked door. You cannot claim self-defense against a closed door. They played the 911 calls Lawrence had made in the past, showing a pattern of irritation rather than fear. They brought AJ's children to the stand. In one of the most emotional moments of the trial, AJ's son described seeing his mother fall. His testimony was a stark reminder of the human cost of this dispute. The jury didn't take long to decide. In less than 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty. Susan Lawrence, who had sat stony-faced throughout much of the trial, now faced up to 30 years in prison. At the sentencing hearing in November 2024, the judge had the final word. Judge Robert Hodges did not mince his words. He spoke about the indiscriminate nature of the shooting. He pointed out that Lawrence didn't even know who she was shooting at. She just fired into the dark, through a wall, essentially. He noted that while Lawrence might have had a difficult life, it gave her no right to take the life of another. He sentenced her to 25 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. At 60 years old, this is effectively a life sentence. As we sit here in 2026, Lawrence remains incarcerated at the Homestead Correctional Institution. The legacy of this case continues to ripple through the legal system. It sparked new debates about how stand your ground is interpreted when the threat is on the other side of a barrier. It also highlighted the desperate need for better conflict resolution in neighborhoods before they reach the point of violence. AJ Owens' mother, Pamela Diaz, has become a powerful advocate for change. Through her Standing in the Gap Foundation, she works to ensure that no other family has to endure the trauma hers did. She speaks of AJ not as a victim, but as a hero who died protecting her children's right to play. As we conclude this deep dive into the Susan Lawrence case, we are left with a haunting question. How does a society balance the right to feel safe in one's home with the fundamental right to be safe in one's neighborhood? Susan Lawrence claimed she was protecting her home, but in reality, she was destroying a family. Thank you for watching this Crime Explorer special. If you want to see more deep dives into the cases that changed the law, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below. Do you think 25 years was a fair sentence, or should she have been charged with murder? We'll see you in the next investigation.